Morning, Pilgrim. Forgive the little echo in the room, but we are Zooming and in person, and you all are having to listen to the Zoom broadcast as well. That's why we're getting a little bit of the echo. So thank you for joining us, those of you who are online and those of you who are here in person. We are here under the auspices of our Antiracism Book Club. How many of you have been participants in one of our book clubs over the last 2 years? Excellent, excellent. Well, we have read now 9 books, and I think this is the 10th. And we are so honored to have the author of Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right, written by Professor Emerita from Berkeley University of California, Berkeley, Arlie Hochschild. Her most recent research focuses on the rise of the American right. And the topic of her latest book, Strangers in Their Own Land, was a finalist for the 2016 National Book Award. Based on intensive interviews with Tea Party enthusiasts in Louisiana, who later became ardent supporters of Donald Trump, her research spanned 5 years. And she tried during those years to scale an empathy wall to learn how to see, think, and feel as they do. She focused on what she calls their deep story, a feels as if story of their difficult struggle for the American dream. I am so pleased to introduce to Pilgrim United Church of Christ and all who are watching, Professor Arlie Russell Hochschild. She'll begin with her own opening remarks, followed by a conversation with moi, and then we'll have our book club members to pose questions for her to answer. Professor Hochschild, the floor is now yours. Yes, let's receive her.
Thank you. Well, it's a real honor to be here and to have a little chance to have a conversation yesterday with Madison and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. I think it's fantastic that you got these books and are really digging into one of the big issues, really, in the country and the world. And I thought I'd take just a few minutes to say how I happened to get into the whole question of a divide in this country, and to write Strangers in Their Own Land. In 2011, I was sitting in my office here, 4th floor of Barrows at UC Berkeley, and thinking something's happening in this country. I was part of the 60s generation where the world was opening out. I was part of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, much of it very active here in Berkeley. And I saw a kind of a thermidorian reaction to almost everything I stand for, and felt alarmed. And I thought, well, I'm in a blue bubble, actually. California blue, Berkeley blue, I am part super blue. And I thought I need to, it's an echo chamber, and I need to understand why what's obvious to me is not obvious to a good half of other Americans, 45%. What do I not get about how they are looking at the world? Or any distortions in my own perception. So I thought I would go to the reddest state I could think of. That would be the Deep South, and within it, not just the South, the Deep South, that left Louisiana and Mississippi. And so I picked Louisiana because I knew one person in it who was the mother-in-law of a former student of mine here at Berkeley in environmental sociology. So she invited me to come, and at first I thought, well, this is just put my toe in the water. Talk to people close up and see their circumstances. So that is how I I discovered that in Louisiana, especially in the southern part of it, around Lake Charles, which is a super petrochemical center, and indeed it's an oil state, that everything was exaggerated. It was the second poorest state in the whole country, and 40% of its money came from the federal government, and it was super right-wing. So I was just where I wanted to be. But to start with just why there is this paradox, the first part of it, I kind of learned something since the book came out, which is that if you look at the counties in blue states and compare them to the counties in red states, what you find is that from 1970 on, we have the winners that would be in blue states and the losers that would be in red states of globalization. So there's an economic substrata to these two parties that we don't normally look at. And so in California, we have new industries, we have high tech, and jobs that call for college educations. We're in urban areas, and generally kinds of work are growing in this sector. And in the red states, you have older industries that are more vulnerable to offshoring and automation. You have blue collar, rural, semi-urban areas. So it's kind of, things are getting better, that is, economic opportunities are opening up, and incomes are expanding in blue states, and they are declining in red states. So that is something I didn't go in entirely aware of. So, what did I find? For those of you who have not read the book, one thing I guess I did discover, and I should say that my method was to take my alarm system off and to permit myself a great deal of curiosity about the thinking and the circumstances of people that I knew going in I had profound differences with. And it added up in a certain way to these deep stories. What is a deep story? A deep story is a story you take truth out of it. It doesn't have to do with facts. And you take moral precepts out of it. It doesn't have to do with that either. It's just what you believe about circumstances that are close to you. And in it, this deep story, a person is waiting in line. They feel in their mind that they have no prejudices, that they are good people, that they like people, love the Lord, and that they're waiting in line for the American dream in a long wait. I talked to guys that said, well, I haven't had a raise in 20 years. Feet are getting tired. And you see in this experience, in this definition of self, that he sees people coming in line. And he thinks, well, what's that? First person would be women. Half the population are now have access to jobs that used to be reserved for men. Line cutters, blacks, who you now have increasingly, as we know, anywhere near completely, access to jobs that used to be reserved for whites. And then you have immigrants and refugees and well-paid public sector workers in the mind of the right-wing Trumper person. These are all line killers who don't have legitimacy to have what they've got. And then the last moment of the deep story, there's someone who's more educated I think that deep story has had different chapters as we look since 2016 when the book came out. And today have to do with the capture of their distress. And I'll say that just two things, and then I'd like to open this out. But people that were the most ardent Trump supporters, and I'm still in the field, but in a different region. I'm in Appalachia, picking up the story there. It's a different version of the same story. And I'm taking a different perspective to it also. But it isn't the abject poor that we're talking about. These are the people that are the most ardent, or what I would call the elite of the left behind, that is in very downwardly mobile sectors, where there's unemployment and economic loss, where people, there are stayers and leavers, a lot of people are leaving, and tax dollars are going down. In those kinds of downwardly mobile regions, it's kind of small business people who are would-be leaders in these regions, who feel the most, to me, aggrieved, anguished, and who have taken what I think of as the Trump bait in a very wholehearted way. So we're just at the other end of the midterms, and there's a little light in the sky, I think. Not because the people I've studied have changed their mind, no. But I think because there are younger voters, women got out and voted, and people are seeing how serious the issue is that we're faced with. So let me stop here, and I'd love to continue.
Yes.
With any questions and thoughts?
Thank you, Professor Hochschild. Yeah, I just want to have a little conversation with you before I turn it over to the panelists, my kind of privilege of my position. And so I do want to pick up on your last theme there. The Tea Party has morphed into MAGA Nation. And they're essentially the same people as far as we know. Do you feel after a 4-year Trump administration and then now 2 years of a Biden administration, the big question that on everyone's mind, do you think that the Republican establishment can block Donald Trump's candidacy, or will his followers propel him to the Republican nomination?
You have just asked the $64,000 question. And I have no crystal ball, but I do think things have shifted. And I think the hearings, actually, although people I've been talking to, no, they aren't watching them, but they caught the word. Even Fox News has, had to look at the hearings, and they had to listen to the people. And a lot of people that I've talked to, what they do is they read, they look at, Newsmax or Fox, things to the right of Fox, but they check CNN, they check MSNBC, and there they've gotten, I think, notice that their guy has really messed up. Now, they will tell me, oh, he's not perfect, but the Lord makes people, imperfect people, to do its mission. And one guy told me recently, oh, don't you know that Abraham was a drunkard, and yet he led his people out of the desert, and Noah, wasn't a nice guy. So they're finding the paradigm. And that's actually what we're doing. We're listening for an a subterranean paradigm that makes sense to them, that doesn't make sense to us. And anyway, the flawed leader is one paradigm through which they understand. They're not defending himself as a moral person. They're excusing him for that. Will he continue? I don't think so. Actually, I don't know that through the interviews I've been doing, because these people would vote for him. But all that's happened, January 6th, the indictments, his offering financial aid to some of the Proud Boys that entered the Capitol. I mean, all of this that to us is outrageous.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to predict that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee, because the establishment has lost control of the party. And everything I've read in your book and what you've just said indicates that they will vote for him, and the primaries are all that determine the outcome of the nomination process. So very interesting. So let me move on to a question that we discussed a little bit yesterday. I loved your keyhole issue. I love that image of looking through the keyhole to see something that they really had at stake, that they loved unquestionably, and that was their environment. They were hunters and fishers and enjoyed the beauty of the world around them, God's world around them. And that was all being sacrificed to the oil industry. And that set up your great paradox on that level as well, not to mention the federal dollars. But one of the questions we had is, what would be the keyhole issue in a state like Michigan? Michigan went for Trump last time. If you were to do your same study in Michigan or any of the Rust Belt states, say Pennsylvania, what would you choose as a keyhole issue, and how would that deep story sound from there?
Well, it's a great question. I think the environment would work in Michigan. I think it would work in actually red states where the environment's actually worse and health consequences more serious. But I think crime and rehabilitation of addicts, where I'm doing work now, it's in eastern Kentucky, the blue-collar white men have been really hit hard by first OxyContin and meth and heroin. I think that in recovery movements, and this, of course, has hit Black inner city men and women in the 70s as economic opportunity preceded them. They became criminalized and stuck in prison 3 strikes. And now the same thing is hitting whites, except now it's medicalized, as you were just saying when we talked yesterday, Madison. So, but I think of the people that I'm interviewing now, I think there are kind of potential empty walls between us and them, and that in deeply red states, I have found there's a kind of top wall where people have done well, feel they have a lot to give, and they reach out to others, from other categories, racial categories, native identity, or undocumented work or not, those categories. So in this all-white conservative area, I'm finding some people that reach over through that bridge, but there are people who are recovering addicts in recovery programs and who touch bottom but risen up. And I think there's a whole really extraordinary possibility of breakthrough and practically there. And I'm just talking empathy, but I think it has tremendous political
So we need a recovering addict as our next candidate. Is that what you're suggesting? All right, my final question.
To recover from Donald Trump.
Well, that's the great irony of him, and this is the one thing I think he might be telling the truth, that he drinks neither alcohol nor smokes cigarettes or does drugs. So there's really no excuse for him. Anyway, my final question is this, and it's kind of, you've answered it partly. You did your study in 2015, 16, 17, and on either side of those years. Do you believe that the empathy wall separating left from right has gotten higher or lower? And if it's gotten higher, do we have any ladders that can help us get over it, or is it just that much harder to get over?
I think the ladder has gotten higher, and I think the reason for that is twofold. I think we're still in our bubble, and although there are really good people and there is a movement to try and reach across, it's not that significant. And I think that the right has gotten more right, and I think it's done that by a kind of a romance between Donald Trump and his base. And I think that the deep story has a number of further chapters in which something almost religious has occurred. I think Trump has said, "You are my people, I will rescue you from your downward stance, from your addictions, from your loss of pride." I'm really interested in pride and shame. That was the new perspective I'm adding to this whole question of the deep story. There's shame, and he's the shame president. He has said to them, I am shameless, and I'm your guy. I'm going to make sure they never shame you. And they say, yes, we want that. You'll protect us. People speak of him as protecting them from us and from their own internal failures in their sector and problems of being downwardly moral. So, and he has said, okay, I'm your guy, you're mine, look how I suffer. And he creates a suffering narrative. And I do so by battling the nefarious press, those eggheads in universities, and the Democratic Party. It's all treasonous, they're my enemy. And look how good a warrior I am against the people who shame you. And then, of course, they then say, yes, you're protecting us from our shame. And then he says, so I've done this for you, your turn to do it for me. Come January 6th, you're the patriots, you're the proud ones, and we will continue a movement that promises you your pride based on old-time values, race values, gender values. They want to push that all back to when they felt proud.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
he's offering them that, and they're
Yeah.
drinking Kool-Aid. So
Wow.
yes, thank you. It's religious. In
Well,
a way.
it is religious, and that's why my answer to the left, they keep throwing these economic arguments, and I want to shout to my, co-leftists, it's the culture war, stupid. And you've nailed it with this pride and shame, this purity and unclean culture in religious terms. And what do they say? Jesus is my savior and Trump is my president. That's the new slogan. Well, thank you for letting me have this conversation with you, but now we have some great questions from each of our book clubs. We have small groups in each of the Tuesday and Thursday sessions. There are 4 small groups in each, and we're going to get a question from each of them, some on Zoom and some here in person. We're going to start with Tom Tyson, who was the facilitator for one of our groups. Tom?
Good afternoon, Professor. I'm going to follow up on your and Madison's conversation a little bit about the empathy wall. Do you feel that you've made it over the empathy wall? And if so, what are your primary insights from the other side? And what do those insights show us about a path forward for yourself and for others?
Wow. Well, you're asking the big one. Did I make it over the empathy wall? What is it to do that? No, of course not completely. It's a hard thing to do. And I just want to be clear, to make it over the empathy wall is not to in any way agree with the person. Not at all. Not at all. There is no sacrifice of oneself, one's commitments in that. A lot of people are afraid, what is this empathy wall thing? It's weakness. It means you're not a real fighter. But no, I look at Nelson Mandela as my model for how he handled these things, and he knew exactly what the other side was feeling, and he spoke Afrikaans. This guy was so big that he didn't fear loss in trying to understand what the other side felt. So that is my model, and no, I didn't, live up to. Didn't do it totally, no. But I did get a peek at another perspective. And, I had a brother who was a psychoanalyst, and he climbed into crazy people's heads. He took an interest in that. He wanted to heal them. He didn't believe what they believed that they were, King Henry III, and but how did he get there? Oh, he was the number 3 son in a disturbed family. There was a story there, and I think in a political way, a sociological way, I'm trying to take that orientation. So I don't feel threatened, and that is what allowed me to get as far as I did. Your second question is, let me think, you had 3 parts.
Well, we're not going to necessarily have a chance for all 3 parts. Let me thank you, Tom, for your question. And we're going to go next to Cherie Magruder. Cherie, can you turn your camera on?
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And again, Professor Hochschild, I want to thank you for this book. I spent many years myself in the southeastern part of the United States and Tennessee, and I appreciate how you were able to build trust and respect with those people that you visited. And I can't wait, you spoke about Appalachia. I can't wait to read your stories and what you find.
Yeah.
Okay, now going on to our question. Black residents were also affected by the pollution caused by the factories and oil companies.
Yeah.
And if you ever think of grabbing hold of a story from the Black experience, I've sure got a story for you. But
Okay, we should be
anyhow,
backwards.
we realized the book focused mainly on political right in America. However, why were those Black residents not interviewed for the book? And if you plan on interviewing them?
Oh, I did actually interview Blacks, but this is a book about their enemy in a way. So, no, but I did to find out kind of what the whole story was there. There is a great, very small environmental movement in Louisiana called LEAN, a Louisiana Environmental Action Network, and that is dealing with both white and Black pollution, but who's really gotten it worse, as we know, the whole literature on environmental racism are Blacks. And one of the people that I dedicated the book to, General Russell Honore, has tried to bridge this. He's starting something called the Green Army. And he is really a model for how to, I think, approach this gap between Black and white, kind of exposure to environmental degradation. So I interviewed them, but I didn't write about them because it's a different book.
Well, let me tack on one quick question. Did you see any Black Tea Partiers in your pool of interviewees?
There was a woman who was at a parade. Trump was coming through Lake Charles, and I went up to her and, how are things? And basically, why are you here? And she turned out to be, our real problem is taxes and a Trump lover. Yeah. So I did. Most of the Blacks that I met there were not Trumpers. Really.
Yeah, the Tea Party movement tended to be predominantly white. Although I read in the statistics that 6% of the Tea Party were Black, which is still surprising, but that's about the number that vote Republican historically. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Our next question comes from Amanda Chen. Amanda, can you turn on your camera? There we go.
Thank you again for being here. I've tweaked my question a little bit after your comments about pride in the community. And I'm wondering does the pride that your Louisiana friends have allow them space to learn or understand the deep stories of those that they perceive to be passing them in line?
Are there, in other words, liberals in the area? Yeah, there are. They're very embattled. And they're a very hardy bunch, liberals in these deep red areas, and their relatives are generally very very conservative. They handle it by avoidance generally. One guy that I'm interviewing now, he's wartime recovering a overdose victim, and very much progressive in this very conservative area. And he goes hunting with his cousins, and he says, well, it's all just men and that are allowed, and everybody with their gun, and a new conversation will open out, where women have to, stay in their place, and blacks have to stay in their place. And I asked him, how do you handle that? Oh, I'm outspoken, and they say, oh, Mr. Liberal, we have to pamper him, he can't take bad news. So you get a kind of a stereotype on you within the kin system, and it's dealt with by humor.
Well, let me tweak Amanda's question just a little bit more. Did you consider, because I didn't read it in the book, or did you ask your informants, as you call them, or your friends, as you call them, all as well, why they thought that the blacks were in the back of the line in the first place? And if things had been fair, would they not therefore need to be or become line cutters? I mean, the presumption is that they're supposed to be back there, but what would they say if you were to ask them, well, you're complaining about these black line cutters, but why do you think they're all in the back of the line in the first place?
Right. Great question. I was looking at a 2020 big national survey, and the American National Election Survey. And there was one item, it's very recent, on it, which went like this. Do you agree or disagree that slavery and experience of slavery and discrimination have made it harder for blacks to work their way out of the lower class? Do you agree or disagree? And this is a recent survey. Only half of Americans agree with that. So, okay, we have work to do. And this isn't just, the backward South. It's, and so if we break that down, we see that the less educated, you have your last degree was high school or less, you're much more likely to agree with that. If you're highly educated, the more highly educated, the more you know it's wrong. And urban is more enlightened than rural, and unemployed more than unemployed. The usual statistical differences, do discern differences, so that if you are an urban, highly educated professional person, 90% are saying no. That's they're saying that all of these things do account, and for the harder times black.
Yeah.
So, but even among the least likely among the whites in these downwardly mobile areas, there are people who lift out of that ignorance.
Yeah, good. Okay, our next question is in person from Candace Young-Schul.
Hi. Are you aware of any of your friends participating in the violence of the January 6th event?
Friends,
Right.
friends, the closest that I've come to that in two ways. There's one guy who said he wished he'd gone to Washington on January 6th, and he is part of a group that did. I asked if I could speak to some in his group, and he said, oh, no problem. But as soon as he asked them, they were afraid to talk to me. But I do have a bunch of interviews with a neo-Nazi who led a white nationalist march down the Center Street in 2017 in Pikeville, Kentucky, and went on to co-organize the mayhem in Charlottesville. And I've asked him, he didn't go to January 6th, and he's changed his mind, actually. And my husband says, well, that's because you've been talking to him. Or rather, listening Socratically. But his story, actually, he's on the autism spectrum. And, you know, listening to him, is interesting. You're always listening with an extra ear to what the paradigm is. And for him, it's shame. And he will refuse to be shamed. He's of German heritage, and we didn't do anything bad. You know? And he's racist, and nothing bad really happened under slavery. So I think that when we look at these denials, these giant kind of denials, it isn't just ignorance, but it's willful as sort of avoidance of pieces of information. We're getting to their fear of being accused, of being saying you're wrong, you're a bad person. And so this guy has changed his mind, but and I'm not in
After,
not in a better place anyway.
Right.
He's still strange, and I don't think he's completely changed his mind, honestly.
after January 6th and the other events that we perceive as very violent and destructive, do you still believe that the divide can be bridged? And if yes, what would it take to do it?
First, yeah, I think we're faced with fascism. That's how scary the January 6th was to me and a lot of us here. I think it would take it would take something giant and a lot of different bridges, both political bridges, economic bridges, actually, and personal bridges.
What-
The Democratic Party used to have a labor movement that was the main vehicle connecting white working class to the Democratic Party, and it's lost that with globalization. The unions were undercut, and I think that thread has gotten hot. And so one would have to put some other engine back there. Now, I think actually Biden is trying that with Build Back Better. And actually, some of the Republican hardcore that I've been talking to have said, well, you know, sometimes you just have to turn the page, and, you know, I could put in an application for a grant with this. They see something in it for them. So to answer your question, what would it take? It would take whole narrative to go with that much help to beleaguered regions. So a different political system on our side, so we would take that. And I think a new kind of understanding that part of civic culture is missing. What kids should be learning is you not only have to be polite to others, but you have to reach out to people really different from you. And a lot of these regions that are extremely right-wing are small towns that are not cosmopolitan, they're threatened by outreach. So I would like to see a national service, like 1 year a year, where kids have to go to another region of the country and they have to do something of service. I actually, after my work in Louisiana, there was last time I was in Dallas with a PBS team that actually it's on the NewsHour. You can see the people that I interviewed there. But there was a young guy who came with me who started something called the American Exchange Project. And they now have, it's in high schools, where high school kids get together on Google and become friends with each other. You send northern kids south, north, black, white, black, coasts, inland coasts. They're now in 23 states. So it's a startup, but it's a good idea. And you don't start with politics, you just start with, gosh, what's it like in your region?
So, Professor, can I interrupt you just for a minute? Because our group's question was pretty much exactly that. And you may have answered it completely. This is Tom Boggs from one of our in-person groups. You may have answered it, or you may have a little more to flesh it out. Our question was, most of your, quote, friends you spent time with were 50 or 60 years plus. We don't see much room for change in that population. What are your thoughts on the possibility of the younger generations of these Tea Party parents having a different viewpoint and a broader worldview?
Great question. And I think there is good news that young people are less conservative than older people. I think that's nationwide, I'm pretty sure, true. And so I think more projects that do engage young people are good. It's also true that the people that I talk to that are older and have kids, if their kids go to college, the kids come home and ask new questions. So extending anything we can do to reduce college debt, to get more kids in college, actually more people of any age in college, the more that is likely to open people's eyes. But I was talking to one super drunk guy, said, oh, when my daughter comes home, she's at the University of Louisville, and now she thinks that I'm an old fuddy-duddy and that I'm racist and sexist and homophobic. And he said it in a humorous way, but it's interesting. He got challenged in that way. He won't listen to MSNBC, but he'll have to listen to his daughter. So that's a channel through which there are changes, I think, the young and old.
Hi, I have a question about page 219. You say that the people you interviewed, Lee, Mike, and Jackie, basically admire the rich above them and disdain the quote-unquote poor slackers below them. How did that square with their Christian values? And did you ever ask them about that, and did it ever come up in conversation?
I didn't ask challenging questions. That would be a challenging question. How Christian are you? I don't know if my conversations with them would last long, but my questions did have implications for them. And I think there was some rethinking that happened indirectly. They all considered, like this Jackie, considered herself extremely religious. She did a volunteering for Abraham's Tent, which gives food to the homeless. So she doesn't think of herself as a, you know, I've got what I want, and I don't want to give anybody anything extra. But she had a firm belief in work, and because her own mother and father split, bad situation, and her mother did not work, and she feels like she barely kind of entered the world of workers. She feels very unsure of her pride as a worker. And she's not thinking about the history of people who couldn't get jobs that were any good because they're back in line because of racism. She divides her notion of herself as a Christian into splitting, and her notion of herself as a good person, a fair person. And she avoids anyone who would question that. She especially, she was very ardent. And I think she's not alone in defining her notion of herself as a good person, a Christian person. And her insistence on work as a basis of pride.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me ask one final question, and need you to keep the answer to about a minute and a half. We want to imagine a new deep story for our friends on the right. What would be the characteristics of a new leader that could connect to their deep story, maybe shift it a little bit, and be able to lead them into a more diverse and open-minded future? What kind of person do you think could accomplish that?
I think there are some really good leaders, actually, in Louisiana itself. This Mitch Landrieu, who was the mayor of New Orleans, and had the statues of Robert E. Lee removed. If you listen to those, his speech on that,
Yeah.
I think he'd be a great leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what we should do to the deep story is, actually, I think, begin not with a line, but with a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that circle within it are a number of public buildings, great schools, fantastic museums, beautiful parks that would focus on how proud a thing that is for Americans to share together.
Well, there you go, raising our taxes again. Dr. Hochschild, I cannot thank you enough for spending this afternoon with us. Let's give her a big hand. My final prediction based on your research, I think that you've given me an insight into folks' deep story, and I do understand it, and I love the fact that we don't have to agree with their deep story in order to understand their deep story. Now, the analogy to psychological setting might offend them a little bit, but did we lose Professor Hochschild? Oh, okay. I didn't see your image there. But I think Donald Trump is still their savior, and in their mind, they're still president because he didn't lose. But I think he will lose definitively in this next election. That's my final prediction based on your research. So I hope that you are right. All right. Thank you, and we'll continue this friendship, and I hope that we'll see you again after your next book on the Appalachian community in Eastern Kentucky. Thank you again. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming and being here, and we will see you next Sunday. Thank you for doing this. Oh, thank you. Terrific. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.